Hi everyone, my name is Melissa and I'm a dietitian and I'm part of the Nutrition Doctor team at Body 20. And in this video, I'm going to take you through how to interpret your inbody report. So without further ado, let's jump in. Now, I like to start with a score out of 100. So this score is just a general score for your body composition. Now, we know that body composition actually plays a great role and a massive role in your health. So we do need to look at body composition and we can't just look at weight on its own. So this score actually gets influenced greatly by muscle mass. So muscle tends to increase the score closer to 100 or even over 100 if you have a lot of muscle. And then fat decreases the score, of course, closer to 0. So in this case, we see this client. So for context, this client is a female, 28-year-old. So 75 is really not a bad score. We actually want to aim for above 70, but we can definitely improve in this case. So we often also see that if the fat mass is too low, it also tends to decrease the score. So we really need a good balance between enough fat in the body, but not too much, and also enough muscle. We can never really have too much muscle at the end of the day. So after I've looked at the score or the points, I then move on to the body composition analysis. So over here, we can see that the body is made up of water, proteins, minerals, and fats. And the water together with the protein actually forms the muscle in the body. The minerals refers to the bone density and the strength of the bones. And then, of course, the body fat is referring to the fat in the body. So these, numbers or the letters you see there is just referring to what it's measured in. So liters for water, for example. These values are actually your body's or this client's values. And then the bracket actually indicates the average or the normal for someone the same gender, same height, and same age as this client specifically. So I always like to start with the water because it's the first one. So water, we know, is really important and it makes up a big portion of the body, as we can see here. So this client's water is 36.4 liters and we see that it is within the normal range. So we could say, yes, it's normal, but we actually see that it's towards the lower end of the range. So moving on to the proteins, we see that that's 9.8. That's also normal, but also towards the lower end of the range. Now, just going back to the water, typically someone would ask, but is this client then dehydrated? Why is the water towards the lower end? So remember that I mentioned in the beginning that water together with proteins actually form the muscle. So if the water and the protein mass is actually on more or less the same, point in the range, that's typically a normal. It doesn't mean that there's water retention or dehydration. It might just mean that there's lower muscle mass. So in this client's case, that she does have lower muscle mass, okay, but it's still normal, but it's towards the lower end. The bone density or the minerals, this is just a screening guide. It's not the be all and end all. The best measurement for bone density is a DEXA scan, a bone density scan. So don't take this as holy, so really still go for proper tests if you need. But 3.65 is also still within the normal range. Now the water together with the protein, like I mentioned, forms the muscle. Muscle mass or lean body mass actually has a massive impact on the bones and the strength of the bone. So the more muscle in the body, that's why it's such a good thing, the stronger the bones. And then moving on to the body fat mass, so we see this client has 17.2 kilograms of fat, which is within the normal range, and then the weight is 67.1. So that range you see there is according to the body mass index or the BMI, and we'll talk about that in a few moments. So moving on to the weight control, we see actually this client is almost at this, the perfect weight that she could be. So 67 or 68, as you see here with the target weight, but we see that ideally she can benefit from losing 1.6 kilograms. So how the scale comes to that number is just trying to put that body fat mass, kilograms, perfectly in the middle of that range. That's just how the scale is, calibrated. It might not be your goal, so just bear that in mind, and that's 100% fine. It's just the way that the scale has been programmed. And then we can move on to the muscle control. We see actually this client would benefit from 2.6 kilogram gain in muscle mass. So, and that's just, again, trying to get that perfectly in the center. So, right, if we move on to the muscle fat analysis, we can see that this refers to the weight compared to the muscle compared to the fat. And it looks at it on a scale of under, normal, and over. So we see weight in this case, and even muscles and fat, all are on, in the normal range. But we can go a step further and connect the dots to each other. So if we connect all these dots to each other, we see the C curve. So that's not ideal. We actually don't want a C curve. Often we see a bigger C curve like so, where the fat mass is really high and the weight's also high. And that's not ideal. That actually increases the risk for cardiovascular disease because it means that there's too much fat for the amount of muscle in the body. So in this client's case, like we see here, she would benefit from increasing the muscle mass and decreasing the fat mass, and then the weight kind of staying the same or maybe even going up a bit so that it actually forms a straight line. Now that's great as long as it stays in the normal. So if we have a straight line in the normal, we actually don't want a straight line in the over range or even in the under range, only in the normal range. So other curves that we actually try to aim for is even a D curve. So that would happen if this muscle mass increases. So let's say she starts training quite significantly in terms of muscle gains. So that would go this way then, that's great, that's good. Or we can even see a P curve. So where the weight is still a bit higher because the muscle mass is high, but the fat mass is really low. So then that typically makes a P curve. That's also fine, as long as we don't see the C curve or even the straight line in the over or under range. So moving on to the basal metabolic rate, hers is 1,446 calories. Now this just refers to the amount of calories or energy your body needs to do its basic functions, nothing else, no exercise or even eating, it's just to survive. And we take this into consideration together with your muscle mass to make sure that you're consuming the correct amount of energy to achieve your goals, whether it be weight loss or muscle gain or whatever the case may be. So I often get asked this question, how can I increase my metabolism, because my metabolism is slow and that's why I'm not losing weight. So the only way that you can really effectively for long term increase your metabolic rate is by increasing the muscle mass. So that's why it would be so beneficial for this client to increase muscle mass, because then the fat mass will also come down a bit easier. The waist hip ratio refers to what it says, the waist to the hip ratio. So over here we see that the waist is a bit bigger than the hips, and we actually want to decrease that. So we'll see also when we move to the side that we can actually benefit from losing some fat around the waist. And then the visceral fat level refers to the fat around the organs. Now we need some fat around the organs to protect them. So let's say you're in a car accident and that shock, that fat actually absorbs some shock, but too much fat around the organs actually increases your risk for heart disease, and it increases chronic inflammation. So we actually don't want too much fat around the organs. So 7 is actually a good value. It's within the range of 1.1 to 9, but ideally we'd want a range between 4 to 7. So 7 is on the range. If she loses the 1.6 kilograms, she'll probably drop down to a 6. So the visceral fat is typically lost not through doing anything really specific, but just having a good balance and looking at your macronutrients, especially carbohydrates, when it comes to refined sugars and white, flours and that type of thing. Really just making sure you're not consuming excessive amounts of that in your diet. But please consult with us if you do have any questions with regards to your visceral fat or anything else for that matter. So the obesity analysis refers to the body mass index. So the body mass index doesn't really give us a lot of information. It just tells you whether you're heavy or whether you're light. So in this case, we see this client has a normal body mass index. So she's a normal weight for her height, but it doesn't take anything else into consideration. So I'm not a big fan of the BMI because it might be very inaccurate for someone with a lot of muscle, or even men, it might be very inaccurate. So percentage body fat actually gives a lot more information. So in this case, we see, again, it's a female. Females tend to, the ideal range is typically between 18 to 28. And for men, it's between 10 and 20. So men do have less body fat than women. And that's typically to do with our hormones that's different. So 25.7 in this case is a normal body fat percentage. If she decreases the fat mass and increases the muscle mass, she'll probably drop down to a 23 around there, which is a really, safe and healthy body fat percentage. We typically don't want to really go below 18% because then, that might influence the hormones or even the just general health of the body. And anything above 28 starts to increase the risk for cardiovascular disease. Lastly, we can look at the segmental analysis. So this lean refers to the muscle and fat, of course, refers to the fat. So lean analysis, typically we're looking at the left and the right hand side, the arms and the trunk going to the half of the bum, that's like the middle and the back, and then of course the legs. So for muscles, we typically want between 90 and 120%. So here we say 120.1 refers to over. That's not a problem. If your muscles are over, that's great. The more, the merrier. And we don't definitely want to be under. And then we can also look at the percentages to give us a guide as to where we should focus our attention on specifically for training. But we can look also at the kilograms. We can see that there's 2.5 kilograms in the arms, so that's just for interest. And the percentages, we can actually look at comparing the left to the right. In this case, we can see that there's quite a significant difference, almost a 3.4% difference in the arms, and then in the legs, the same, about let's call it less than a 2% difference. So in this client's case, she is right hand dominant. So typically the right hand side could be stronger in that case. Typically do a bit more things with her, arms, with her right side, so that's okay if we see that. If we do see a percentage higher than 6% difference in the arms, then we start to get worried. Then there might be a little bit something else, some overcompensation or something going on. I would then say it's good to talk to your trainer or especially to a biokineticist or even a physio. If you do typically see your one arm or leg really overcompensating for the other, that's really something to look out for. In this client's case, she would benefit from focusing on muscles or building muscles in the core, but even in the legs, trying to get above 100% is actually our goal. Above 100% for muscles is great. Fat-wise, we want to be below 160%. And then even in the limbs, if you can get below 100%, that's amazing. So we see legs are really thin or small in this case. This client's also a runner, so that makes sense. And majority of the fat being in this middle area. Now that makes sense because all of the organs are also in this area, so they will always be a bit more fat. And females, again, will also have more fat here because we need fat to protect the uterus for babies to grow. And then also a little bit more fat in the upper region of the body. And this could be typically because maybe a little bit too much consumption of sugars or refined carbohydrates, like biscuits or crackers or that type of thing. So it's not that you're not allowed to have that, it's just that balance and the amount that you consume to watch that. And that will also then affect the visceral fat. So lastly, we can look at this graph. This just looks at the history. So every single time you get on the scale, it just compares it to the previous time. So in this case, in this client, we can see that it's kind of been a constant weight, sometimes a little bit lower, sometimes a bit higher, but more or less almost like on the 67 range, 68. Muscle mass kind of stays the same. So like I said, she was a runner. She wasn't really focusing much on strength or building. Yeah, in this, the previous measurement, we see quite a big difference. And that's typically something you want to look out for. If there's a massive change in your body, in your inbody score, it might be something else. It's not necessarily, that you've gained. So in this case, it's muscle. But sometimes it could be the other way around where your fat mass is extremely high. So there's typically a reason for that. It's not necessarily, especially if you've been following your eating plan and you've been training. So, the scale is very sensitive, which is a great thing. But it sometimes can be oversensitive with water shifts or even being sick, or for women menstruating, it might have effects on that. So that's typically what you'll see here. So this is really good to to track your progress. So that's it in a nutshell for the InBody report. If you do have any questions or if you struggle to understand your InBody report, make sure to chat to your trainer, your Body20 trainer, or you can even send us an email to nutrition@body20.co.za or send us a WhatsApp to our WhatsApp service on 063 675 5426. Have a great day.